Good evening and welcome back to Talking Pop Culture with Jake D. We are here this evening to cover the latest episode of CBS All Access's absolutely horrible, god-awful adaptation of The Stand. Yes, that is right. The Stand is still showing on CBS All Access, and we have reached the 7th episode. And my goodness, we did actually finally get an episode that was close to 50% faithful to the novel, give or take, somewhere around there, ballparkish. And it was actually a little bit better than what we had seen in the past. So I'm going to start off with my rating for episode 7. And we're going to come in today at a 5.5 out of 10. 5.5 out of 10, despite the fact that we did finally get a more faithful rendition of the events from the novel that we are used to and were somewhat expecting. So the main push and thrust of what we've got tonight was the walk. The four folks from Boulder who were making their way to Vegas on foot. So everybody in this episode was leaving Boulder to go to Vegas or leaving somewhere else to come to Vegas. Everybody's going to Vegas tonight. And so Harold and Nadine, after they do that weird ass like double activate the walkie-talkie to blow up the bomb at Mother Abigail's place, they head to Vegas. Mother Abigail, true to the book, dies, but before she does so, she sends Stu and Larry and Glenn and a fourth character to walk to Vegas. The funny thing about this character, she had been in and around Mother Abigail's sphere through the whole show, really. And I never really caught on to who the hell this was. How bad is it? Well, I'll take The Stand over the Disney tragedy. How's that, Geek Tripology? Does that help you any? I will take this series over the Disney tragedy of movies. Captain Trek, hail sir. Glad that you popped in, my friend. But yes, The Stand is definitely better than the Disney tragedy of movies, but it's not good. It's really, after we finished the back and forth, jumping through time, the show certainly improved. Tonight's episode was one of their better efforts, despite only ranking it at a 5.5 out of 10. Part of what pushes the rating so far down, despite perhaps the story or production quality maybe meriting higher, it's because what comes before these pieces of the story is so important to make you give a shit about what's happening that in and of itself drags the rating of the episode down. If episodes 1 through 6 had been in the 7 to 8 out of 10 range on their ratings because of what they'd done with the story, you're probably looking at a 7.5 out of 10 for this episode, because it was a lot better than, say, episodes 2 to 4 that were god-awfully horrible. But because what leads up to tonight's episode was that bad, you can't connect with the story tonight the way that you needed to. So it's not nut crushing bad, but it is nut electrocuting bad. Yeah, you're in the neighborhood there, Geek Tripology. Absolutely. So Nadine and Harold, true to what we see in the novel, head off to Vegas after they blow up Boulder, and they pop on the motorcycles, and Harold has his crash, just like we saw in the book, and Nadine, of course, leaves him behind. Once again, just like we saw in the novel. So this portion of the story is truly relatively intact. You did actually feel a little bit for Harold dying, because he was one of the very few characters in this entire miniseries that you got to know and to understand and perhaps even develop a little bit of sympathy for. There's almost no one else in this entire show that you know and is as well developed as the character of Harold Lauder. So you do feel a little bit when he dies in this week's episode, which is weird. If you're familiar, he is something of a tragic character, and he starts out good. He has his fall to temptation, and he comes to terms with his faults and his sins, so to speak. He doesn't get the opportunity to repent other than in what he pens out in his notebook as he's dying on the side of the road. So it's a tragic story for this character. And Owen Teague, by far the best actor in this show, portrayed him well. Nadine heads off to go hook up with Randy Flagg. The novel, The Meeting of Flagg and Nadine, was not remotely what we saw from the book. So Geek Tropology says it's Stephen King. It should have boobs and scares. How difficult is it to make boobs and scares? Well, this particular story honestly was not big on boobs and scares. If you've read the book, it is about the deep experience of a rich list of characters, and the cast is wide and huge, and you get to know a lot of them very intimately through the novel. And in the show, you didn't get to know any of them intimately at all, and that's why it's so bad, Pablo. It's just god awful. So so Nadine, when she meets up with Flagg, their meeting is pretty true to the book. He picks her up, he meets her out in the middle of nowhere, and then, of course, he takes her as his wife and experiences her carnally, which, to your point, you were looking for some boobs there, Pablo, but we don't get that. And you probably didn't want them anyway because Nadine is played by Amber Heard. So in the book, that action of Flagg taking her is portrayed more like almost like an R. Okay, you're not really supposed to say that word on YouTube. So it's like an R. When a man forces himself on a woman, it's an R. And that's what you see in the book. But in the show, it's more of a, she's welcoming and ready to have him and what have you. And something just goes kind of weird. And she gets this flash of a demon creature instead of Flagg, the human looking character. In the novel, and I'll give him this, that this would have been hard to portray in this miniseries, particularly since it's on television. But she basically envisions his member as a really nasty, attacking, slithering creature, and it freaks her out, and she goes gone, like she's gone in the head after he has his way with her and brings her back to Vegas. And she basically never says a word again, and she just kind of wanders around with mainly an empty head and his baby in her belly. Whereas in the show, they took that vacancy kind of out of her, and she's still interactive, which just wasn't right. I was also expecting Nadine's suicide in this episode. Another scene from the novel that it looks like that they have skipped. Because at the end of the episode, she meets up with the crew from Boulder as they're brought into the Inferno casino where Flagg is made his base from. And she looks like the Walking Dead at the end of this, which, again, pretty big deferral from what happened in the novel. Because in the novel, she ends up, leaping off the balcony and killing herself. And it's one of Flagg's big defeats. And it's part of what makes Vegas unravel. I don't think they're doing that because, granted, it's been a good 10 or 15 years since I read the book, but I think by the times that Larry and the crew arrive in Vegas, she's already killed herself in the novel. Now, I've got some great commenters on these videos, and I'm sure they'll correct me if my memory on the timing of that is off, but that's what the old noggin is telling me happened in the book. And that's really kind of your flag-centric storyline. The other major portion of what we see is, of course, the crew walking to Vegas. And you got Stu, you got Larry, you got Glenn, and then you've got this fourth character. The fourth character, I didn't realize until I actually had to look it up on the internet today who the hell it was. It is a character named Ray Brentner, who is a gender-swapped version of the book character Ralph Brentner. And Ralph was not a super major character, and I didn't even necessarily realize that this Ray character was Ralph. That's why I had to look it up, and I was a bit surprised by it. It's funny because despite being a minor character, the lady who plays this is not bad. And probably the funniest moment of the entire show was when they are walking. They're beginning the walk, and they're talking about how they're going to find food and water and things like this. You know, J.J. Thomas says he can't believe the lack of character development this series has compared to the previous series, which had only 4 hours. Yeah, and there's two big things I think that cause that, JJ. The first one is the writing in this series is so god awful, and the editing choices where they're skipping around all over the place, and they take really minor sort of unimportant scenes and they'll play them out for 10 minutes in this show when they could have spent that time in the backstory and giving you an opportunity to get to know and care about our main characters whom you're supposed to be sympathetic to. The second major factor is most of the actors suck. The actress who plays Franny, like, she's fucking asleep through this entire series. She is horrible, man. I mean, she is just god awful. I don't think I've seen an emotion in her other than, like she's on Valium or something. It's ridiculous. She's given such a flat, awful performance. The only exception is Owen Teague, who played Harold. Everybody else has just phoned it in for this entire thing, which contributes to this lack of character development. When everybody's giving these flat performances, why would you give a fuck about any of them? You know what I mean? And we don't. You couple that with a shitty script and bad editing, and all you're left with is there's a bunch of people on the screen, and the one that you feel the most sorry for when they die is the psychopathic murderer Harold Lauder, which is insanely awful. I mean, it's just an absolute travesty what they've done to an amazing story. I mean, the novel The Stand is nearly 1,200 pages long, and they've got 9 episodes to present this massive story to us, and we've just seen shit. But what I was getting there, though, is that Ray Brentner is a race and gender swapped character because it was 4 men that walked to Vegas, and it was actually something of a debate by Mother Abigail when the surviving members of the committee were told to go. And she made a point that it had to be the men, if I recall the conversation correctly. Again, it's been 10 or 15 years since I read the book, so I could be remembering that slightly wrong. So they're heading to Boulder, and the funniest scene and actually some of the best chemistry, like between characters of the entire show, happens when they're talking about how they don't know which rivers won't give them giardia if they're drinking out of the water on their trek across the country. And they look over at the Ray Brentner character, and they ask her if she knows, and she cracks a really funny joke about, oh, you think I know this thing because I'm a Native American, so I should know these things about the land. And Stu looks at her and he says, well, don't you? And she's like, well, yeah, I do. And it was like, it played well. It was actually really funny. I enjoyed that scene and I laughed. It was one of the first like natural good chemistry interactions among a group of characters in the entire show. And we get it at the end, right? Before we have like a fun scene where it feels like real people, which is fucking crazy. So they head out, and you know that one of them is going to fall along the way while they're walking to Vegas. And it happens when you get to, again, true to the book, there was a washed out section of road where they had to go down a gully and then climb back up the other side to continue down the road that they're traveling on. And you have it played out precisely how I remembered it from the book. And Stu falls, he breaks his leg. They set it for him, and he has to push the other guys onward. And so having them leave Stu behind where he's injured. I mean, he's got a broken leg, so he's not going anywhere. And they have to leave him behind. It was supposed to be really, really heart-wrenching. But the thing about it is it fell completely flat because you don't know as a viewer just what these people's bonds with each other are, because we just haven't seen it on screen. They can tell us that they're close friends all they want, but you don't feel anything as a viewer unless you've seen it and you've experienced it. And the presentation of this show has made it so that you didn't see any of that. You didn't experience it. And so, okay, Larry, Glenn, and Ray leave Stu behind, which as a human situation, it sucks. But you get the decision, right? But you don't feel the heart-wrenching loss that Larry should be going through, because in the novel, one of the biggest important things about Larry is that he starts off as not a nice guy, and he starts off as a selfish guy and somebody who doesn't care for others. And his character arc in the novel, where he becomes that leader and he becomes the person who does care deeply about the others around him, it's a hugely important part of his character that we didn't get in this series. So when he has to get convinced by Ralph to leave Stu behind in the book, it just rips you apart, right? And it's killing Larry to leave the guy. But what we saw on the screen was it was totally meh, because despite the actor who plays Larry being okay, he is one of the better performances in the show, because we don't feel the closeness that these people are supposed to have. It's like, whatever. So the rest of the crew heads on, and Glenn's dog, Kojak, true to the book, comes back and stays with Stu in the gully. The crew heads on. They walk for maybe another day at most, and it hasn't been long because Glenn keeps calling Kojak, and they get picked up by the Inferno stretch limo, and it is Lloyd Heinrich, played by Ruby Rod. I am so pissed at this characterization of Lloyd, because it's not even fucking close to who he was in the book. It's Chris Tucker's Ruby Rod. That's who he's playing, and it's terrible. So Ruby Rod comes to pick up Larry and the crew, and he takes them into Vegas to meet with Flag. And we get a couple of neat scenes with Flag floating around and what have you, but we don't get Nadine's suicide. In fact, she meets Stu and the crew at the entrance to the hotel. And that's the show tonight, folks. I mean, that's it. And we're not even really sure why they went to Vegas, or what the point and purpose of it is. You've got a much better idea what's going on in the novel, because you're in everybody's heads, especially Mother Abigail's, who really lays out for you what is going on. And basically, it's supposed to be a confrontation between, her acolytes having, walked through the wilderness to face down the agents of the devil and evil. And they go there with, no weapons, no necessarily even intent to perhaps harm him, simply to confront the evil who is Flag. And the one other scene we get in the show that I haven't covered is Ezra Miller's psycho trash can man pulls the nuke out of the base. And the way that he brought it out of there was relatively true to how it came out in the novel, with the exception of the fact, of course, that Flag sent him there rather than him doing that to try to redeem himself in Flag's eyes after he'd blown shit up in Vegas. man, that feels like a whole mouthful running through what we went through. And the best I can say about it is this is about a 5.5 out of 10 episode. This series as a whole has been god awfully disappointing. It has been missed opportunity after missed opportunity after missed opportunity. And even in an episode where they get half of it right, the stuff that they fuck up is kind of important, like Nadine killing herself and becoming just sort of a vacant vessel carrying Flag's spawn. So missing a lot of that stuff, it just divorces you from the power of this story and the reason why it's been a popular novel for 30 years. And without the character development and the story, you can't become connected to these people who are trying to survive in this crazy post-apocalyptic world. I'm through this to the end. Now, interestingly, episode 8, next week's episode, is basically going to be the end of the book. Pretty much from what we've been told, the entirety of episode 9 is Stephen King's new ending, which is going to be very, very curious to see. They've done an entire episode that is post the fall of Flag. And that is, for most of the time I've been watching this, it's the only thing I've been interested in because the execution of everything else has been so terrible, just absolutely awful. So we do have 2 episodes from now, 2 weeks. We get to see whatever it is that King has envisioned for a new ending to this show. And if how bad the previous 7 episodes we've experienced are any indicator, this new ending that King has put together is not going to be very good. I do have this morbid curiosity driving me to see it, but that's really it. It's just this, what did he put together to do here? It's the only interest I've still got. So coming up next week, what can we expect to see? Trashy's going to show up with the H-bomb. The crew from Boulder is going to be put on trial to be executed in the square in Vegas. And the hand of God is going to come down to set off Trashy's H-bomb and destroy the entirety of New Vegas. We're probably going to get, and that'll probably be by halfway through the episode. And the second half of the episode is going to be Tom Cullen finding Stu in the gully, helping him get back to Boulder, and then kind of the reunion between Stu and his sleepy wife, Franny. And that will be the entirety of episode 8 in all likelihood, because we've been told that episode 9 is the new ending. And I just can't see them executing next week. I think it's going to be god awfully horrible. And they're probably going to completely flub this whole Deus Ex Machina that destroys Flag's dominion. And I'm sad, right? I'm really sad about how this show has gone, because The Stand is such an epic, wonderful novel, and they could not have gotten this more wrong than they did. It's just sad. All right, y'all. I think that is definitely it for tonight. Definitely look forward to catching you again. I'm going to schedule a WandaVision review either probably for Saturday morning, I'm thinking. Sometime Saturday morning, we'll run through the next episode of WandaVision. Got my Howling About Entertainment show on Sunday evenings at 5:15 Central Time. And, of course, join me next Tuesday on Foulball Productions channel as we cover the season finale of The Expanse. It has been a great, great evening. Thank you all for being here. Everybody have a good evening. We'll catch you on the next stream.